We're looking ahead at the markets this week. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. As American Airlines goes to bankruptcy court today, I'll be speaking with Jad Mawad about what the carrier hopes to achieve. But first, I'm joined by Jeffrey Kleintop. He's the Chief Market Strategist at LPL Financial in Boston. I'm also joined by Peter Evis from DealBook. Morning.
Hi, Winnie.
So Peter, talk to me real quickly about how did the markets open this morning after a tumultuous weekend in Europe?
Yeah, Dan, and that's not surprising. It's been kind of brewing in Europe for a while that it should return. It has over the last couple of weeks, had some bad headlines out of Europe, and then we had the French elections, the first stage of the French elections, which I think is behind a lot of this.
So Jeffrey, everyone in the markets is really wondering how much are we dependent on Europe going forward? What do you see ahead?
You know, we are certainly tied to Europe given the global nature of the financial system, but you know, it's not just Europe that's softening here, and it is softening. We've got China and the emerging markets to worry about as well. Remember, we trade 3 times as much with the emerging markets as we do with Europe. So as long as they're in good shape, we can get by. But the problem is, not only did the manufacturing data prove weaker than expected for the Eurozone this morning, it also did so for China. And that's a real concern. If China's trajectory continues to soften, that will not allow a buffer to offset the weakness we're seeing in Europe.
Jeffrey, just a question. What is it about the French election results that investors should be worried about, if anything?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is that, you know, this does certainly mark a shift in domestic policy for France, moving from the center-right Sarkozy to the socialist Hollande. That could certainly mean different things in terms of how France implements its austerity packages going forward. It also means Hollande may fight for renegotiation of the fiscal compact that has held the Eurozone together. Remember, it's been Merkel and Sarkozy that have really acted as kind of the co-leaders of the anti-crisis efforts within the Eurozone. Certainly, this could mean a split between France and Germany, and some questions as to the direction on future anti-crisis leadership.
And with the Dutch government also in disarray, shall we say, there's a real question about how much are we going to really have an emphasis now on should we have austerity, or are we going to turn our backs on it? What do we see ahead?
Yeah, that's the concern. Well, I think we've taken 2 steps forward over the last couple of quarters with the changing governments and the implementation of new packages. I think we're due for 1 step backwards here, as now a lot of the leadership in a lot of these countries, changes in parliament, we now see some step back. And you know what? That's to be expected. This is not going to be a linear process, and it's one I think we're seeing increasingly priced into the banks. We'll hear from the Spanish banks this week in terms of their earnings reports. Credit default swap spreads have already risen. Worries about concern they may need more capital, a risk of default, and their stock prices have plunged. So we'll certainly be listening very closely to what they have to say about their non-performing loans and whether they may need injections of capital from their already beleaguered government.
American Airlines was the last big U.S. air carrier to declare bankruptcy. As it goes to federal court today, I'll be looking to cancel its contracts with its unions. Jad Mawad has been covering the airline industry. He joins me now. Good morning, Jad.
Good morning, Winnie.
So, U.S. Airways would very much like to acquire American out of bankruptcy, but for a while at least, American has some time in court to make its case. What's sort of the decision making here?
Well, U.S. Airways, there's no carrier that U.S. Airways doesn't want to buy. Now American Airlines is basically its last chance. But American has been granted until, the current management at American has been granted until the end of September to present its own reorganization plan. They're in court this morning to argue before a judge to scrap their labor agreements. Right. So this is how the summer is going to play out. You know, can American's management present a credible plan to the judge that will ensure the carrier's survival?
So American is the last of the major airlines to go through this process in an attempt to lower its cost. If you're a member of the union there, where your pilots or others, you know, are you looking at this as which deal looks better to you just superficially?
Right. Well, you know, the U.S. Air deal looks great because there's really nothing on the table. There's a commitment from U.S. Airways to say we will take better care of you than American. On the other hand, that's hard not to look into, because Americans' stance today is, for the unions and for labor, very radical. They plan to scrap or terminate, most of the pension and health benefits and cut pay. And so if you're a worker at American, this is extremely worrying. The labor relations at U.S. Airways, though, aren't all that great either. U.S. Airways merged a few years ago with America West, and they're still having labor relations problems of their own.
And so what is the bankruptcy judge likely to do? Is it likely to give exclusive time to American to keep working at this?
Most probably. Bankruptcy judges don't look at jobs. They look at the survival of the entity. And most labor and bankruptcy experts believe that the judge, yes, will grant American, certainly through the summer, maybe even an extension to present a credible plan. The creditors also have a say into this.
That's
and
right.
so obviously, if the creditors are convinced that there is a credible alternative plan, they could ask the judge to withdraw or shorten that exclusivity period.
Is there some concern that the unknown becomes a problem? People don't know, they maybe get nervous about things like buying their tickets far in advance for an airline that they're not sure who's going to operate.
Yeah, not really. History tells us that airlines operate in bankruptcy very well. United Airlines in 2005, I think, stayed in bankruptcy for 3 years. Planes took off on time, meals were served then on board. Planes fly, tickets are sold, so that should not be a concern.
But there's a potential for merging of things like frequent flyer programs and that sort of thing between US Air and American.
Yeah.
And people have to decide sort of whether they want to make a commitment, right, to staying in the American program. Does that sort of start to become a problem at some point?
That could be, yeah, there could be. You could have some, folks who would decide, where their best interest lies. I mean, this industry has been going through a lot of turmoil, and this is perhaps one of the last major chapters of the major carriers, if you will, going through this very painful restructuring.
And just for a moment, for all of us who are traveling this summer, it's very tight. There's not much capacity. Is there any sense that any of that's going to change?
The conversation you had previously, if the economy goes bad and demand starts to fall and people don't travel as much, if oil prices go down, yes, perhaps ticket prices may go down. Otherwise, it's hard to see.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough summer for flyers.
It will be.
All right, thank you, Jad.
Thanks, Winnie.
That's all for today. Please stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage of this and other stories. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.